These are the top 10 most broken abilities ever. Abilities have been shaping competitive Pokemon since Gen 3 to varying degrees, and in many cases, they do so too effectively. Many have been nerfed or banned, but even many of those that haven't received such treatment could be said to have a great deal of brokenness to them, and that's what we're exploring today. But as a quick note, we are not including transformation abilities, as they're basically their own entity that's tied to a specific Pokemon, like Zero to Hero, Power Construct, and Battle Bond. So without further ado, we're jumping in head first to an ability which is all about going first, and that is Prankster. Going first is all sorts of game breaking, from Choice Scarf to Dragon Dance to Thunder Wave to Trick Room, and Priority is its own distinct category within the constantly escalating attempts at one-upsmanship in this regard. Priority moves are generally specific. They're mostly thought of as weaker attacking moves, with some stronger or more utility-focused counterparts, such as Fake Out for the latter. However, there are also plenty of utility moves with Priority, most famously Protect and its counterparts. Doubles has plenty in this regard, such as redirection moves. These moves are all incredibly impactful, specifically because they go first. Protect wouldn't be nearly the game definer that it is in both singles and doubles if it didn't get the jump on whatever the opponent was attempting to do on that turn. This is the incredible strength of Prankster. Though not as world-shattering as the other abilities on this list, it is incredibly impactful, especially in the support-heavy world of VGC. Prankster Taunt is one of the most incredible tools to have at your disposal. It doesn't matter how fast your opponent's setup is, you're going to stifle it, barring Mental Herb, of course. For all its massive speed and power that so terrorize singles, Thundurus spends its time in VGC dominating with Prankster, providing not just fast taunts, but Thunder Waves as well, and even the dreaded Swagger. Of course, its Priority Thunder Wave was an incredible tool in Gens 5 and Gen 6, either letting it ruin most revenge killers to it, or allowing it to act as an emergency check to just about everything. Priority Thunder Wave was so good that it allowed that lowly Klefki to act as the most reliable answer to Xerneas in Gen 6 Ubers 2, combined with the excellence of Priority Spikes. Consider how Gen 7 buffed Dark types to be Prankster immune, offering some respite against the ability. That kind of change doesn't come out of nowhere. Without it, Gen 8's Grimsnarl Wars would be absolutely insane, but with it, they don't even bother running Taunt most of the time. And speaking of Prankster Dark types, going first with utility moves is so enormous that Murkrow, of all things, carved out a legitimate VGC niche, providing excellent team support through not only its Priority taunts, but through forcing an opponent to move last through Quash, the weakening of an opponent's attack through Feather Dance, or speed control in Thunder Wave or Tailwind. And since Murkrow doesn't need speed investment to go first, it can instead completely bulk itself out and become quite a decent hit taker with Eviolite. Prankster doesn't seem broken, but when you really look at how incredible it is, suddenly it makes sense for the developers to have nerfed it a little bit. Now, Prankster is great, but it's not intimidating, like Intimidate. Formerly called the best ability in the game in the Gen 4 days, Intimidate obviously isn't broken, but rather was thought of as such because of how massively helpful the attack drop was in so many situations, creating impromptu checks to majorly threaten physical attackers in ways that couldn't have been matched by just about anything else. Salamence was the most feared attacker in Gen 4 OU, but with Intimidate, it was consistently helping out defensively against beasts like Lucario and Breloom as well, while being able to stave off just about anything physical in a pinch, from Scizor to Tyranitar to Gyarados. Gyarados was of course a superb Intimidate user itself against targets, such as the aforementioned, while also finding use against threats like Machamp and Infernape. It went so far as to utilize the ability to become the tier's preeminent physical wall on stall teams, borderline required for how it devoured seemingly everything physical. It was sometimes paired with Hitmontop, a UU Pokemon whose Intimidate nevertheless gave it an OU niche when paired with Gyarados. These two Intimidators pulled similar tricks in Intimidate's debut Generation 3, being a wonderful blend of playing defense while still in offensive modes. In fact, this defensive capability let them bring out the most of their offense. For instance, Salamence being able to use even Aerodactyl's Choice Band Rock Slide as an opportunity for Dragon Dance. Alternatively, Salamence could act as a defensive linchpin itself with a bulked out Witch set. One of the reasons Metagross was so threatening in both Gens 3 and 4 was because its clear body meant it couldn't be intimidated, much like Bisharp's Defiant would later turn Intimidate into an attack boost. And indeed, though Salamence and Gyarados continued to intimidate opponents throughout Black and White 1, Black and White 2 arrived and brought with it Landorus Therian, otherwise known as the counter to just about everything physical, single-handedly bringing Terrakion down from its previous broken status to seriously considering the use of Hidden Power Ice. For generations, Landorus T's Intimidate was such a catch-all, it was regularly used to pivot into even many super effective physical moves. Waterfalls, Ice Shards, yeah whatever, it's going to slow down your non-bishop, or better yet, your unmega'd Metagross or whatever physical attacker you have. It could partner up for this purpose with Mega Manectric, who brought superb speed and power to its own Intimidate. Intimidate's reach is doubly important in VGC, with its simultaneous targeting of both opposing Pokemon, which made Landorus Therian just as ubiquitous, if not more, and then Incineroar joined the fray, countering everything to the point that it may as well have been holding Psychium Z from how it left a certain world champion with a shattered psyche. It seems to have left its mark on Game Freak too. In fact, Intimidate has been nerfed to no longer work against Pokemon with Scrappy, Inner Focus, Own Temple, or Oblivious. But still, Intimidate is scary, but it doesn't quite reign over the next ability, Supreme Overlord. Now, Kingambit would have still been excellent if it just maintained its pre-evolution's Defiant, but instead, it is truly absurd with Supreme Overlord. Then again, nearly halfway capable offensive Pokemon would get catapulted a few flags off the viability pole if they had it. The reason it is such an incredible ability is how its power boosts punish the opponent for doing exactly what they need to do in order to win, which is feinting the other Pokemon. Because its power boosts scale in accordance with the number of feinted Pokemon. It forces opponents into a brutal lose-lose situation. You can't really afford to be precious about not feinting opposing Pokemon when threats like Roaring Moon are bearing down on you, but as soon as you do, you make the Kingambit that's being preserved for later that much more threatening, often to the point where you won't be able to withstand it. It is the ultimate architect of last Pokemon comeback sweeps. It's not like using Kingambit is completely brainless though, but few things in Pokemon truly are, even the broken ones. And more than any other option, Supreme Overlord means that even if everything goes wrong, you can very easily be bailed out and have everything wind up going right. In fact, everything going wrong is a form of setting things up so that it can go right later. And if it doesn't go wrong early on, then all is fine. It's superb on all kinds of teams, but Hyper Offense is especially frightening because it's already a playstyle that thrives on early game Pokemon sacrifices, both for entry hazards and for setup sweepers to knock huge holes in an opponent's defensive core. Now, doing that goes beyond its obvious momentum and opportunity creating benefits, as each time you sacrifice a Pokemon to do its job, you're also pushing Kingambit further into the danger zone. Imagine if a 4th gen team with Stealth Rock Explosion Azelf that then sets up its Dragon Dance Gyarados was also powering up its last Pokemon as Azelf and Gyarados sacrifice themselves, as they already were meant to do. There's a reason Kingambit has come very close to the Banhammer. Supreme Overlord means that it is constantly set up for its success, whether its teammates are still around to support it or feinted to strengthen it. But as great as Supreme Overlord is, it lacks a certain magic, like Magic Bounce. Dealing with the all-powerful forms of indirect damage and general utility is difficult enough. Magic Bounce, or Magic Mirror, for those who remember the early translation when the games were only out in Japan, doesn't just stifle everything from Taunt to Stealth Rock to Toxic Squint to Whirlwind. It sends it flying back at the opponent. When you got taunted and can't set up your rocks, that's already one thing, like when you're counting on them to keep things like your opponent's Volcarona in check. But this is a whole new form of punishment. Stealth rocking into a Magic Bouncer will actually have you set up rocks against yourself. Not only do you not have rocks, you save the opponent the effort of having to get them up themselves. This tool is the principle behind the Magic Sun playstyle of Gen 5 Ubers, a form of fast-paced drought offense hinging almost entirely on abusing Ho-Oh in spite of its Stealth Rock weakness, through aggressive leveraging of rock blocking. Simply the threat of Magic Bounce's reverse effect is often enough to dissuade an opponent's Dialga from even trying to set up rocks in the first place. The Magic Bouncer in question, you would think it's ridiculously out of place in Ubers, and at first it did seem like a form of cheese, but it proved itself to be the real deal, just the same as how it rocketed to genuine OU status. In spite of their many flaws, Espeon and Xatu frustrated many Stealth Rock attempts. Xatu notably completely shut down Ferrothorn and helped make Gen 5 OU Sun teams as absurdly broken as they were. Mold Breaker, Stealth Rock, Extrajo, and Dredagon in the lower tiers were popular specifically because they bypassed Magic Bounce. The Roar and Whirlwind blocking effect also made Espeon a staple on another broken playstyle, Baton Pass, which it continued to appear on over the next several generations, also in Ubers, until the move's banned. Magic Bounce's excellent effect also featured on 2 Megas, Absol and Diancie. Their frailty meant they weren't going to be tasked with hazard blocking in the same way Espeon and Xatu were, but as Megas, that wasn't going to be their primary task so much as the fierce offensive threat they presented. Their presence did could force opponents into mind games, which was incredibly valuable, but the real value came in how they completely nullified would-be counterplay to most threats, like Will-O-Wisp, Toxic, and T-Wave. You actually had to watch out that they didn't switch in, as you aim those moves at their teammate and wind up making you eat your own effect. Now, Magic Bounce is superb, but the next ability is a masterclass in flexibility. I'm of course talking about Protean and Libero. One stab or one useful stab can already be enough to devastate the entire game. Dual stab is especially ferocious, but in Gen 6, Game Freak bravely answered the question nobody had deigned to ask. What if you could have stab on everything, everywhere, all at once? Okay, that's not the only effect Protean has, theoretically. Changing type based on the moves you made could theoretically also be for defensive purposes. A theoretical Protean Skarmory would not be the same as Protean Greninja because it's so slow, weak, and has a poor offensive move pool. Forget it cycling between stabs. The interest there would be how it changes typing for defensive purposes. For instance, the way it becomes a ground type when using spikes, meaning it has an almost terrestrializing quality to its counterplay. Forget getting trapped by Magnezone for one. Now, Greninja can also wield Protean for defensive purposes, with spikes as well. Like for instance, if it's feeling daring against a Volt Switch Rotom Wash. But in practice, this is not what Protean does, or Cinderace's Libero for that matter, because these abilities were given to fast, powerful Pokemon with superb offensive move pools. The effect was indeed a major threat with Stab on every one of its many already dangerous attacks, meaning in spite of a perfectly reasonable attacking stat, these Pokemon were hitting ridiculously hard with moves that would have already been threatening without Stab thanks to their great coverage. Their would-be regular stabs were also so good that, along with their overall excellence, it's not like they particularly needed their accentuating moves amped up. Greninja packed two of the best stabs around, while Cinderace's greatest weapon was always Pyro Ball. However, they wound up just going completely over the top instead, both getting banned, Cinderace twice. Despite the singles focus, Game Freak seems to have caught on to the overwhelming strength of the ability on Pokemon such as these, since, well, nobody's worried about Protean Kecleon. Or maybe they just didn't want to complicate things with terrestrialization. Either way, Gen 9 introduced the third Protean starter in 4 generations, except now the ability had been nerfed to only change its user's type to that of the first move selected upon each switch-in. Meowscarada is still very good with this new Protean. Cinderace is solid as well, but without the nerf, both would have been overwhelming, despite not packing the longevity of the next ability, which is Regenerator. It's not the most broken ability on this list, but it certainly is the most hated. Many top players have made known their contempt for Regenerator over the past several generations. This wasn't really the case in Gen 5, nor has the dislike extended there retroactively. The Regenerator pokes there were very good, but hardly overwhelming given the litany of entry hazards and permanent weather they just barely managed to keep up with. At the time, Regenerator was seen as a blessing, a necessary tool for defensive play to not get completely trucked by the outrageously powerful new threats running around. Tangrowth was possibly the most immovable thing for Sandrush Escadrille to face. Slowbro staved off Speed Boost Blaziken, and come Black and White 2, Amoonguss repeatedly stifled Keldeo. Nobody could argue against these as anything but good. Okay, yes, Regenerator completely broke Tornadus Therian and its Perma-Rain Hurricane spam, but that was an exception of a Pokemon that was already dangerous for its strength alongside its uncommon speed, beating out even Alakazam. However, in Gen 6, when the skies cleared up and hazards were easier to manage with a buff to fog, suddenly Pokemon like Alomomola seemed to have a new lease on immortality, and the problem only worsened with the fog's increased distribution in Gen 7, with Tornadus Therian notably helping itself reap the benefits of defensive regen on its new utility playstyle. At this time, Regenerator was already the subject of widespread dislike, especially thanks to Toxapex, but when Gen 8 allowed the ignoring of hazards with heavy-duty boots, hatred for the ability exploded, especially since the Slow Twins could no longer be pursued either. You now had the most effortlessly immortal Pokemon of all time, bringing out what was seen as the worst aspects of Regenerator, its mindlessness. You could withstand a massive hit and just be fine. The way Regenerator undid offensive progress so easily, it seemed to deny the very possibility of its existence altogether. Plus, the Slow Twins also didn't even switch out manually, instead wielding another incredible tool in buff Teleport, meaning they could respond to whatever you did, making the whole affair even more risklessly skewed in their favor. But even Galarian Slowking, which didn't teleport, packed that same infuriating immortality. When you consider how easy it is to stack multiple Regenerator Pokemon, you start to understand why some players wish that Game Freak would at least knock the healing percentage down to 25% instead of 33%. Although you also wonder if this ability's brokenness is simply the cost of trying to keep ever-increasing power creep in check. But even Regenerator couldn't guard against as much as the next ability, Magic Guard. Here we have an ability that has warped metagames and caused arguments of vein-bursting intensity among the many blistering demands for tiering action against it. Generation after generation, passive damage is so deeply baked into Pokemon's system of offense that even teams which operate at a fast pace pace with no shortage of powerful direct damage, will often find themselves frustrated by Magic Guard. How can something as unimpressive as Clefable stave off attacks as strong as Heatrand's Fire Blast, or Latias's Choice Specs Draco Meteor, or even Soul Dew, given that Clefable not only became an OU staple ever since Gen 4, it even established itself as a force to be reckoned with in Gen 5 OU, but even has a serious role in Gen 4 Ubers. Its bulk only works if it is constantly absolute pristine condition, but that's just the thing. With Magic Guard, it is always in that perfect shape required to just barely withstand powerful hits. You know that whole thing where Stealth Rock's ubiquity means that it's taken into consideration for damage calculations regarding 1-hit KOs and 2-hit KOs? Clefable doesn't have to worry about that. It's why so many people were bent out of shape about heavy-duty boots for so long. It felt like everything had gained access to Magic Guard. Of course, Boots Pokemon don't possess a Magic Guarder's complete stifling of damage from status and Leech Seed. It's far from just Clefable, but Reuniclus and Alakazam were the subject of so much controversy in Gen 5 OU. The rules were rearranged just to try and slow them down with the unbanning of Rapid Spin Excadrill, but even this didn't work. It wasn't just the slow burn of the long-term aim of a Calm Mind Sweep either. Magic Guard also allowed the use of recoil-free Life Orb, meaning that if Alakazam didn't want to use its guaranteed Focus Sash, it could dart in and out of battle, unleashing unbelievable power without drawback. Reuniclus and Clefable were just as apt at wielding Life Orb as well. Their playstyle repeatedly pushed metagames to try and emulate their resilience, and they were so effective that players tended to adopt a can't beat 'em, join 'em mentality while campaigning for tiering action. But even Magic Guard didn't warp the battlefield itself, just like weather and terrain abilities did. It used to be clear, both Ubers and OU had their permanent weather. Ubers had Groudon's Drought and Kyogre's Drizzle. OU would go berserk with that kind of power. OU had Tyranitar's Sandstream, later joined by Hippowdon, as well as an alternative in Abomasnow's Snow Warning. But primarily, OU's weather was sand. It was completely shaped by it in Gens 3 and 4, and that was its balance, taking into account the chip damage that affected every non-rock, steel, and ground type, as well as the rock-type special defense boost in Gen 4, just as Ubers was completely shaped by sun and rain. It's why you saw things like Latias running Thunder even on Sun teams, because it was being used to take on opposing Kyogre and was realistically going to be operating under rain very often. You generally didn't see a lot of Thunderbolts. Conversely, it's why you didn't see Sun teams running Solar Beam, because it was constantly at risk of being disrupted by an opposing Kyogre. Then Gen 5 came around and the balance was disrupted. Permanent Drizzle and Drought were now mixed with OU Sand, and the result was chaos. In spite of many attempts at bending over backwards to accommodate their presence, the fact remained that these abilities, without enormous restrictions on the many brutal strategies they fueled, were too much for OU, and for VGC for that matter. It's why in Generation 6, the abilities were nerfed to instead become ability versions of manual weather moves, summoning their effect for 5 turns, and 8 with the corresponding Ascension Rock. This made them far more reasonable. You no longer were under unreasonable pressure to actively fight weather with your own weather. You could simply wait it out, which meant even previously unhinged monsters like Sandrush Excadrill became quite manageable. Imagine Mega Swampert under permanent rain. Ubers also saw an upheaval in its weather strategies come ORAS. Forget the temporary weather they had just started getting used to. Primal Groudon and Kyogre's weather was permanent so long as they were on the field, and it was so powerful that it overrode all other weather. The only way to get rid of their weather while they were on the field was to switch in their counterpart. Desolate Land couldn't be stopped by Drizzle, for instance. The only weather tactic to overcome it was Primordial Sea, and vice versa, since Delta Stream was of course quickly gone from the equation in singles. Furthermore, Primal Groudon and Kyogre became completely immune to water and fire moves respectively. That's right, the newly Ground Fire Groudon is now a perfect counter to water moves. Meanwhile, the terrains, while actually introduced as moves in Gen 6, defined the game upon becoming summoned through the Tapu Surge abilities in Gen 7. Their effects all-consuming. They're not thought of as broken necessarily, they're not as drastic as weather, and they last just as long, but even so, they wind up peerlessly influential regardless. Singles saw a variety of overwhelming abusers. Mega Metagross was absurdly broken in all of them, and their effects on VGC were 9 incomparable, as is expected when up to 4 Pokemon are affected simultaneously. In light of the terrain wars, they too were nerfed. In Gen 7, Electric, Psychic, and Grassy Terrain powered up their respective move types by 50%, which was a bit much, let's say. Tapu Lele was renowned for its stupefying psychic power, to say nothing of teammates it enabled like Mega Alakazam and Medicham, while Tapu Bulu pulled a similarly frightening trick in conjunction with Kartana. In Gen 8, this power boost was reduced to 30%, which was a significant drop, but the likes of Tapu Lele still hit ludicrously hard, as did new Grassy Terrain setter Rillaboom. Boom, and its terrain-specific priority, Grassy Glide. This all came to a head in Gen 9 Ubers, where the box legends didn't summon Drought and Drizzle, or two forms of terrain, but instead Koraidon summoned Sun, while Miraidon summoned electric terrain. Meanwhile, their field effects consistently overlapped. That is, until Miraidon was banned from Ubers. Note that Koraidon didn't have Drought and Miraidon didn't have Electric Surge. Nope, they basically had Mega Drought and Mega Electric Surge, because Orichalcum Pulse and Hadron Engine respectively not only summoned their field effect, but also made their user more powerful while the effect was active. To say nothing of all the Photosynthesis and Quark Drive Pokemon they also powered up. Even with both weather and terrains having been nerfed, they so command nearly every aspect of the game that they remain incredibly broken, and yet still not as broken as denying the opponent's switch thanks to Shadow Tag. Competitive Pokemon is all about switching, theoretically anyway, until something wielding one of those unholy abilities shows up and renders your poor Pokemon as incapable of switching out from its impending KO as the Elite Four, no matter how poor their mismatch is. At least these abilities are balanced out by the fact that they're given to really bad Pokemon, right? Nope. Even though Pokemon like Wobbuffet, Gothitelle, and Dugtrio are bad in and of themselves, when you can't escape from them, they are perfectly capable of ruining you. Of course, when Mega Gengar wields Shadow Tag in Ubers, things really get insane. Even Diglett has been wielded to seriously good effect in multiple generations of OU. It's why the Arena Trap ability is banned instead of Dugtrio, as opposed to Magneton and Magnezone's Magnet Pull ability. The grounded reach of Arena Trap is already too vast, to say nothing of Shadow Tag. Oh, but they struggle to KO things. Doesn't matter, they tend to KO what they need to, but Gothitelle's stock and trade was often ruining its target through tricking or a choice scarf, while Dugtrio ruined plenty of Pokemon just by toxicking them. You might say, wait, not even a KO? But yes, indeed. Consider this example from early Gen 7 OU, when Dugtrio's stall was utterly ruinous. You've got a Swords Dance Tapu Bulu, which threatens to win the game for you. It is thus incredibly valuable. You have to be careful though, because if Tapu Bulu sets up in front of something that can toxic it, you probably won't sweep with it, and as a result, will probably not win. So your game plan becomes to set up Tapu Bulu without taking a toxic. But wait, there's Dugtrio. It switches into Tapu Bulu with a Focus Sash attack, as it so often did thanks to its good anti-hazard support, and you cannot avoid taking its toxic. Even if you KO it, it still got its job done, which was to inflict the one thing you could not afford on Tapu Bulu. And how do you avoid this? By not actually using your Tapu Bulu. But the trappers struggle to switch in, right? Well, not really. Not nearly as much as they need to have their effectiveness quelled. Even the famously frail Dugtrio with the Sash, forget needing a prediction or a teammate sacrifice to get on the field. It could switch directly into anything Kyurem Black could do. Yes, even its Ice Beam or Z Freeze Shock. It'd get knocked down to the Sash, then use its full power reversal for the KO. Of course, in Gens 3 and 4, it ran Choice Band instead, but still managed to switch deceptively reliably. In Gen 3, it took advantage of the lower power level, while Gen 4 had plenty of U-turn users to lure targets in and safely get it on the field. When these trapping abilities are allowed, they are always leveraged to overly restrictive ends. They are fundamentally broken, uncompetitive, and whatever other word you'd care to use. But finally, there's only one most broken ability, and it is unquestionably Wonder Guard. Granting a complete immunity to every non-super effective attack is the most obviously broken ability of them all. So unbelievably broken, it transcends the word's definition. Game Freak knew they could only give this monstrosity to Shedinja, a Pokemon with literally 1 HP, so it would be auto-KO'd should the opponent be able to make contact with it, which, given the many weaknesses to its bug and ghost typing, wouldn't be difficult to do. Plus, Shedinja's very slow and pretty weak, so it's not like it's going to threaten you too badly. Plus, even putting these weaknesses aside, its 1 HP meant it was literally one-hit KO'd by any form of passive damage: Sandstorm, Stealth Rock, Poison Burn, Leech Seed, and yet, even with this weak, weakness-riddled Pokemon, Wonder Guard is so powerful that Shedinja has found niches in some serious competitive play. Gimmicky? Of course, but the niche is certainly there, and there's nothing like the sinking feeling of realizing you've run out of super effective moves against it, which is a lot more likely than you'd think. Look at all the types you can't hit it with, many of which are among the strongest attacking types in the game: Water, Ice, Electric, Fighting, Ground, Psychic, Grass, Steel, Dragon, Fairy, Bug, and Normal, meaning Rapid Spin. Plenty of Pokemon carry coverage that can target Shedinja's weaknesses, but many don't, and that's how Shedinja's most famous use historically has been to counter Kyogre in Gen 3 and 4 Ubers. You have to support it with Rapid Spin, but nothing blanks Kyogre like Shedinja, and in Gen 4, it even gains 2 lives with the addition of Focus Sash. It's gone on to find gimmicky niches in OU. Some Gen 6 stall teams used it to wall tear-shattering Keldeo and Manaphy. Gen 7 saw it do the same against monsters like Tapu Lele, and really bold players could slap on the Sandstorm ignoring safety goggles. Then in Gen 8, Shedinja gains an Uber niche through heavy-duty boots ignoring hazards, letting it wall Xerneas. Yes, Shedinja is untiered and not good, but the fact that such an awful Pokemon can be used to completely stonewall the scariest Pokemon in the game is a testament to the unbelievable brokenness of Wonder Guard, which would give incredible defensive niches to even the Pokemon in the 7 weakness club. And thank you so much to our Platinum patrons. Thank you to Amphozenus, Alex Sable, Anthony Belval Renault, Bingleton, Daniel Isbeast, Funky, Glitcherton, Howl, Jack G, King Yabber, Megamon VGC, Nurse Jake, Pretzel SP, Soljiro Sakura, Spavoon, Skylaria, Soras and Croxon, Shiwei Miji, Stoneface Colin, Kiboflu for their major support of our videos.